A millionaire visits his wife's grave when he finds a sleeping child on the headstone saying, "Sorry, Mom," hugging a photo of her. The sky was gray with heavy clouds hanging over the silent cemetery. The distant sound of the wind blew between the graves, carrying with it a melancholy air that seemed to perfectly match the weight on Alejandro's shoulders. He walked slowly. His footsteps left marks on the snowy ground as he approached the place where his wife lay. 5 years ago, Camila left, leaving behind a void that Alejandro still couldn't fill. His pain was like a wound that never healed. It only went numb at times but always returned with the same intensity. He visited that grave every month, on the same date, Camila's birthday. It was his way of keeping her memory alive, although that memory often hurt him more than it comforted him. When he arrived at the site, something unexpected caught his attention. A small boy dressed in simple, weather-worn clothes was curled up on the white marble tombstone. He was fast asleep, hugging something to his chest. Alejandro frowned in confusion and slowly approached. As he got closer, he realized that the object in the boy's hands was a photograph of Camila. His heart stopped for a moment. The image was unmistakable. It was the photo he had taken himself years ago during a trip to the beach. Camila was smiling radiantly, with the sun illuminating her brown hair and her eyes full of life. Alejandro felt a tightness in his chest when he saw such a personal memory in the hands of a stranger. "Who are you?" Alejandro asked, his deep voice cutting through the silence of the cemetery. The sound startled the boy awake. He blinked a few times, trying to get his bearings, until his clear eyes met Alejandro's. There was something in the child's gaze, a mixture of vulnerability and determination that contrasted with his fragile appearance. The boy looked at the photograph in his hands, and then at the man in front of him. For a moment he seemed to hesitate, but then he spoke with surprising conviction for someone so young. "That's my mommy." The words hit Alejandro like a punch in the stomach. His eyes widened in disbelief, and he shook his head. "Your mommy? That's impossible," he said, trying to keep control, although his voice shook slightly. "That woman was my wife. She died 5 years ago." The boy didn't seem intimidated by Alejandro's reaction. On the contrary, he stood up, still holding the photograph tightly, and answered simply, "I know, but she was also my mommy. She visited me at the orphanage before she left." Alejandro felt the world spin around him. His legs gave way, and he had to hold on to the tombstone to keep from falling. How was that possible? Camila had never mentioned anything about having a child or visiting an orphanage. He thought he knew every detail of her life, but now he realized that perhaps there were secrets she had kept from him. "What's your name?" Alejandro finally asked, trying to organize his thoughts. "Matias," the boy replied without looking away. "She said I was special, that one day I would have a real family." Alejandro swallowed hard. Each word Matias said seemed to open new wounds in his already wounded heart. He didn't know what to think or feel, but one thing was certain: that encounter would change his life forever. The cold wind was blowing stronger now, snow falling and making little Matias cross his arms in search of warmth. His thin body was shaking slightly, but he kept looking at Alejandro with an expression that mixed innocence and trust. "Did you say she visited you at the orphanage?" Alejandro asked, trying to remain calm, although his mind was a whirlwind of questions. "What do you mean? When was that?" Matias nodded, holding the photograph against his chest as if it were his greatest treasure. "She came to see me almost every month. She always brought me sweets and told me stories about you." He paused, tilting his head as if he were reliving those moments. "She said you were very busy, but that one day we would meet. She promised." Alejandro felt a lump in his throat. Those words were like sharp knives cutting through his defenses. He could barely process what he was hearing. Camila had never mentioned anything like that, at least not to him. How could she hide something so important? "And that photo, did she give you that?" Alejandro pointed to the image in the boy's hands, his voice still thick with disbelief. Matias nodded firmly. "It was the last thing she gave me before she left. She said I should keep it safe because it was a piece of her, and that if I missed her, I could look at it and remember that she would always be with me. The simple but profound words hit Alejandro like a blow straight to the heart. He lowered his eyes for a moment, trying to control the emotions that threatened to overflow. The idea of Camila going to the orphanage, bonding with that boy while he remained oblivious to that part of her life, was overwhelming. He felt a mixture of guilt, sadness, and anger, not at Matias but at himself for being so distant. "It's getting late," Alejandro said finally, forcing himself back to the present. He took off the coat he was wearing and placed it over Matias's fragile shoulders. "You can't stay here alone in this cold. Let's go somewhere where you can get warm." Matias hesitated for a moment as if he were evaluating whether he could trust the man in front of him. But then he seemed to relax, perhaps recognizing something in Alejandro's eyes, perhaps the same kindness that Camila used to describe when she spoke of him. "Will you take me home?" Matias asked, a hint of hope in his voice. Alejandro hesitated before answering. He still didn't know what to do with that boy. Everything seemed so surreal, so out of control, but for now he knew he couldn't leave Matias there, exposed to the cold and loneliness. "First, let's get you out of this cold," Alejandro replied, avoiding answering the question directly. He held out his hand to the boy. "Come with me." Matias looked at the offered hand for a moment, then took it timidly. It was a large, warm hand, completely different from his own small, cold ones. He walked beside Alejandro in silence, but his eyes shone with childish curiosity as he observed the man Camila had described so often. The two of them walked to Alejandro's car, a luxurious vehicle that gleamed even under the gray sky. As he opened the door for Matias, Alejandro noticed how fascinated the boy seemed by the car's impeccable interior. He got in slowly, almost reverently, as if he was afraid of touching the wrong thing. "You're rich, right?" Matias asked bluntly. As Alejandro walked around and got into the driver's seat, Alejandro let out a short, bitter laugh. "Something like that. Camila used to say that you had a lot of things, but sometimes you didn't have time to enjoy them," Matias commented, looking out the window as the car began to move. That sentence echoed in Alejandro's mind like a painful echo. He knew Camila was right. For years he had prioritized work, money, success, everything except the woman who really mattered. And now, those choices seemed to be coming back to haunt him in ways he could never have predicted. Silence filled the car as Alejandro drove toward the city. The heater turned on and the warm air began to chase away the chill that enveloped Matias. Even so, the boy continued to hold on to the photograph, as if he was afraid of losing it again. "Do you know who I am?" Alejandro asked suddenly, unable to contain his curiosity. Matias nodded. "You're Alejandro. Camila talked a lot about you. She said, you were a good man. You just needed to learn how to be happy again." Alejandro's car pulled up in front of the orphanage, an old building with weathered walls and windows that seemed to tell stories of many lives that had passed through there. The place had a melancholic air but also a sense of human warmth. Distant children's laughter echoed in the inner courtyard, mixed with the sound of toys being moved on the concrete floor. Alejandro got out of the car, followed by Matias, who now seemed more alert but still held the photograph tightly in his small hands. The boy walked beside him, looking at the building as if he were returning home after a long journey. "Do you know this place well?" Alejandro asked, trying to make conversation as they climbed the steps to the entrance. Matias nodded but said nothing. His eyes reflected a mixture of nostalgia and apprehension. It was clear that he felt something deep for that place, but there was also a shadow of sadness, perhaps due to the uncertainty of what would come next. Upon entering, they were greeted by a middle-aged woman, dressed simply but with a welcoming smile on her face. She was the director of the orphanage, Doña Raquel, as she introduced herself upon seeing them. Her eyes widened when she recognized Matias, and then turned to Alejandro, whose imposing and elegant posture contrasted with the humble surroundings. "Matias, Doña Raquel," she exclaimed, approaching to hug the boy. "Where have you been? We were worried." I just wanted to see my mommy, Matthias replied, looking down shyly. She's here. The director frowned in confusion before realizing that the boy was holding Camilla's photograph. She sighed, understanding the situation, and then turned to Alejandro. Sir, Alejandro, he replied, offering a firm handshake. I knew Camilla, this boy's mother. He hesitated as he said that, as if the words still sounded strange to him. Doña Raquel's eyes widened again, but this time with genuine surprise. Camila, are you her husband? Alejandro nodded briefly. Yes, and I would like to understand more about this story. Matthias says she used to visit him here. Can you explain it to me? Doña Raquel seemed to ponder for a moment before answering. She indicated that they should enter her office, a small but organized room with shelves full of folders and documents. A framed photo on the wall showed several smiling children, including Matthias in a corner. Please sit down, Doña Raquel said, indicating 2 chairs in front of her. Alejandro obeyed, while Matthias remained standing next to him, holding the hem of the man's pants as if seeking protection. So, Doña Raquel began, folding her hands on the table. Yes, Camila had been coming here regularly for the past 2 years. She had taken a great interest in Matthias from the beginning. She said he was special, that there was something about him that touched her deeply. She started visiting him, always bringing him gifts, talking to him, and creating a bond. Alejandro felt a lump in his throat. He knew Camila was kind, but he had never imagined that she would dedicate so much time to another person, especially a child. Why had she never told him? Did she talk about adopting Matthias? Alejandro asked, his voice a little more strained than he intended. Doña Raquel nodded slowly. Yes. About 6 months before her death, Camila started the formal adoption process. She was determined to give Matthias a home, but the woman paused, choosing her words carefully. She died before she could complete it. The words hit Alejandro like a punch to the gut. He froze, his fingers gripping the edge of the chair until his knuckles turned white. Everything made sense now. Camilla's mysterious walks and the moments when she seemed absent, even though she was physically present. She was building a new life, a life he didn't even know existed. Why didn't she tell me? Alejandro murmured, more to himself than to Doña Raquel. His voice was choked, filled with pain and guilt. Doña Raquel watched him with a sympathetic gaze. She mentioned a few times that she wanted to tell you, but she thought you were too busy with work. She said she was afraid you wouldn't understand or wouldn't have time for it. She loved you deeply, Mr. Alejandro, but she also felt like she needed to do something on her own. Those words were like knives cutting through every layer of defense Alejandro had built up over the years. He felt ashamed. Ashamed for having been so absent, for having neglected Camila so cruelly. He had put his quest for success above the love they shared, and now he was paying the price for it. What about Matthias? Alejandro asked, trying to maintain his composure. Does he know all this? Doña Raquel nodded. Yes. Camila talked to him a lot about the future. She said he would soon have a family, that he wouldn't have to stay here anymore, but after she left. The woman looked at the boy tenderly. He started visiting her grave whenever he could. It seems he believed that if he waited long enough, she would come back to take him away. Matthias lowered his head, clearly embarrassed at being discussed. Alejandro felt a tightness in his chest as he realized how strong the bond between the boy and Camila was, a bond he hadn't even realized. So, she wanted to be his mother? Alejandro asked, still processing everything. Yes, Doña Raquel replied. She saw Matthias as part of her family. Maybe that was the legacy she wanted to leave for you, Mr. Alejandro. Alejandro closed his eyes for a moment, trying to absorb the weight of those words. He didn't know what to do. But one thing was certain: he couldn't simply ignore what was happening. That child, who called Camila Mommy, was living proof that his wife had dreamed of something greater, something he had missed the chance to share with her. Thank you for clearing all this up, Alejandro finally said, standing up. He looked at Matias, who was watching him with wide, curious eyes. "Let's get this sorted, shall we?" Matias didn't answer, but he tightened his grip on Alejandro's pants, as if silently asking not to be left behind. And for the first time, Alejandro didn't want to let go. Those simple words spoken by a child were enough to make Alejandro feel a tightness in his chest. He didn't answer, but his fingers tightened on the steering wheel as he fought back the tears that insisted on welling up. As incredible as it seemed, something inside him already knew that meeting wasn't a coincidence. It was the beginning of something that would change his life forever. The silence in the car was palpable as Alejandro drove back to the city. Matias sat in the passenger seat, looking out the window with Camilla's photograph still tightly held in his small hands. The weight of the conversation at the orphanage hung over them like a thick cloud. But there was something Alejandro needed to understand, something that might help him see more clearly the emotional abyss he had created. "Matias," Alejandro began, his voice soft and hesitant, as if he were choosing his words carefully. "You said before that Camila talked to you about me. What did she say?" The boy turned slowly, his clear eyes meeting Alejandro's in the rearview mirror. He seemed to think for a moment as if he were sorting through the memories in his mind. Then, with touching simplicity, he answered, "She always said you were too busy, that you worked too hard to give her everything she wanted." Alejandro felt a tightness in his chest. Those words were all too familiar. They echoed in the very arguments he used to justify his constant absence from Camilla's life. He had always believed that his work, his success, was a way of showing love. But now, hearing it come from the lips of a child, it seemed empty and insufficient. "And what else?" Alejandro asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Matias hesitated for a moment, but then continued. "She said you were good. Very good. That, sometimes good people just need time to understand what's most important." He paused as if he was considering whether he should continue. "She also said that when you met me, you would love me." That last sentence hit Alejandro like a lightning bolt. He felt the air being sucked from his lungs, as if he had been punched in the stomach. His fingers involuntarily tightened on the high steering wheel as he fought to keep control of the emotions that threatened to overflow. "When I met you, I would love you," Alejandro repeated, his voice cracking. He couldn't take his eyes off the road, but his mind was far away, immersed in memories that now seemed so distorted. Camilla was right. He was busy. He was too busy to notice what really mattered. He was too busy to notice that his wife was building something bigger, something he never knew existed. And now that boy, that child who called Camilla mommy, was living proof of everything he had lost. Why hadn't he noticed? Why had he never questioned the moments when Camilla seemed distant, tired, as if she were carrying an invisible weight? He had simply attributed it to the stress of everyday life, without ever stopping to really listen to her. He had always thought that money, gifts, and luxury could make up for her absence. But now he understood that no material possessions could replace time, presence, or true love. I didn't know that," Alejandro murmured, more to himself than to Matias. "I had no idea." Matias tilted his head, watching him with childlike curiosity. "Camilla said you'd understand one day, that you'd see that I was special just like she did." The words were simple, but loaded with meaning. Alejandro felt a wave of guilt and sadness flood his heart. He knew Camilla was right. Matias was special, not just because she loved him, but because he represented something greater, the chance to right the wrongs of the past, to rebuild what he had neglected. "I'm sorry, Matias," Alejandro finally said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I'm sorry for not being there when you and Camilla needed me. I was a fool." Matias didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked back down at the photograph in his hands, as if seeking solace in Camilla's smiling features. Then, after a few seconds of silence, he spoke. "Camilla said that no one is perfect, that everyone makes mistakes, but the important thing is to fix it later. Those simple words, spoken by a child, were enough to make Alejandro feel a lump in his throat. He knew that Matias was right. Perhaps Camilla had been trying to teach him this lesson from the beginning. She had always been like this, patient, understanding, and full of hope. And now, even after her death, she continued to guide him through the words she left behind. "You're right," Alejandro said, swallowing hard. "I'll try to fix this. I promise." Silence took over the car again, but this time it was different. It was a reflective silence full of unspoken promises and future possibilities. Alejandro knew that the road ahead would be difficult, that there would be many decisions to make and difficult truths to face. But for the first time in years, he felt something he had long forgotten. Hope. It might be too late to make up for lost time with Camilla, but there was still a chance to build something new, something she had dreamed of for him and Matias. Doña Raquel handed Alejandro a folder of documents before they said goodbye to the orphanage. "These are the papers related to the adoption process," she explained, her eyes understanding. Camilla had everything organized. She was determined to make this work. Alejandro accepted the folder with trembling hands as if it were something precious and yet too painful to hold. He could barely look at the sheets of paper without feeling the crushing weight of guilt. Every signature from Camilla, every detail she had meticulously planned, was a stark reminder of how far away he had been. It was clear that she was fighting for something bigger, something he had not even noticed. In the car, while Matias dozed in the passenger seat, Alejandro opened the folder and began to look through the documents. There were handwritten forms in Camilla's delicate handwriting, notes from meetings with lawyers, and even letters she had written about her intentions. One of them, dated a few months before her death, she wrote, "Matias deserves a family that loves him unconditionally. I know Alejandro will understand when the time comes." Those words were like sharp knives cutting into his soul. Alejandro felt tears stream down his face for the first time in years. He had not only neglected Camilla, he had also ignored his dreams and hopes. All because he was too busy accumulating wealth, achieving empty goals that now seemed insignificant in the face of this reality. "How could I have been so blind?" Alejandro murmured to himself, wiping his tears with the back of his hand. He looked at Matias, sleeping peacefully, and felt an even greater tightness in his chest. That child was living proof of the plans Camilla had made, a legacy he had never known existed. When they arrived at Alejandro's mansion, the contrast between the luxurious surroundings and the simple life Matias knew was shocking. The automatic gate opened slowly, revealing a huge, perfectly manicured garden with ornamental fountains and stone paths leading to the main entrance. The house, all glass and marble, shone in the soft afternoon light. But there was something oppressive about it, a coldness that went beyond modern architecture. Alejandro helped Matias out of the car and led the boy inside. The boy looked around with wide eyes, but he didn't show the same fascination that many children might have upon entering such a grand place. Instead, he seemed uncomfortable. "Is this where you live?" Matias asked, his voice echoing through the wide, silent spaces. "Yes," Alejandro replied, trying to sound casual but feeling strangely exposed. He knew that this place had no soul, more of a showcase for success than a home. "It's very big," Matias commented, walking slowly through the main hall, where expensive furniture and works of art decorated the space. "But Mom said that her house was big but always empty." The words hit Alejandro like a blow straight to the heart. He froze in the middle of the room, unable to respond. How could Camilla know that? Had she been here before? Or did she simply understand who he was better than he did? What did she mean by empty? Matias asked, turning to look at him with childish curiosity. Alejandro hesitated for a moment, searching for the right words. He knew exactly what Camila meant, but admitting it out loud was difficult. "She probably meant that I didn't spend much time here," he finally said, avoiding the true meaning of her words. "I worked a lot. Sometimes I even slept in the office." Matias tilted his head, as if he were evaluating her answer. Then, after a few seconds of silence, he spoke. "Mom used to say that big houses are beautiful, but they are only happy when they have love inside them. That simple but profound observation made Alejandro feel a lump in his throat. He looked around, realizing how much this place reflected his own life. Cold, empty, and devoid of human warmth. Even with all the money and comfort, he had not managed to create something that really mattered, a home. "You're right," Alejandro finally said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "This house is big, but it's missing something important." "Love?" Matias suggested with the naivety characteristic of a child. Alejandro nodded, feeling a huge weight on his shoulders. "Yes, love." He looked at the boy, who was now exploring the room with curiosity, touching objects carefully, as if he were afraid of breaking them. Matias was so different from him, so genuine, so full of life, and Alejandro realized that somehow this boy was the key to filling the void he had been carrying for so long. "Let's get you something to eat," Alejandro said, trying to change the subject. "You must be hungry." Matias nodded in agreement, but before following him to the kitchen, he stopped and looked at Alejandro. "Do you think Mommy would be happy here?" The question caught Alejandro off guard. He thought for a moment, imagining Camilla walking through those halls, filling the space with her laughter and energy. But then he realized that Camilla didn't need luxury or wealth to be happy. She needed love, connection, and someone to listen to her. "Yes," Alejandro replied, his voice breaking. "She would be happy if we learned to make this place a real home." Matias smiled shyly, as if approving of the idea. And for the first time in years, Alejandro felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe there was still a chance to rebuild something, not just for himself and Matias, but also as a tribute to Camilla's legacy. That night, while Matias slept in one of the mansion's guest rooms, Alejandro sat alone in the living room. The house was silent except for the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock. He was holding the folder with the documents that Donna Raquel had given him, and as he flipped through the papers again, he found something he hadn't noticed before. A sealed manila envelope with his name handwritten on it, in Camilla's unmistakable handwriting. His heart raced as he carefully opened the envelope. Inside were several letters written by her, addressed to him. Each one contained words that seemed to have been extracted directly from Camilla's soul. "Dear Alejandro," the first letter began, "I know you might think I'm making rash decisions, but Matias is special. He has a heart so big, so full of hope that it reminds me of who I was when we were younger. I want to give him the love and security he deserves. I know you're busy, but when the time comes, I ask you to look at him and see how much he needs us. He needs you." Alejandro felt his hands tremble as he read those words. It was as if Camilla was there speaking directly to him. He continued reading the other letters, each one detailing her plans to adopt Matias and her concerns about how Alejandro would react. In one of the last letters, she wrote something that left him completely paralyzed. "Alejandro, my love, I know that sometimes you close yourself off in your own world because you think that's what you have to do to be strong. But I need you to know, you are already strong enough to love, and if something happens to me before I can finish this, promise me that you will take care of Matias. He is part of us now, even if you can't see it yet. Please don't abandon him." Tears streamed freely down Alejandro's face as he held the letter to his chest. Camilla's words were like knives cutting through every layer of denial he had built up. She knew exactly what he needed to hear, even if he had never shown any signs of being ready to hear it. How could he ignore so much? How could he let her face all of this alone? Yet despite the overwhelming guilt and pain he felt, something inside him still resisted. He couldn't just accept Matias into his life without question. It wasn't fair to the boy. He barely knew the boy. And the thought of taking on the responsibility of being a father, something he had never planned on, was daunting. Maybe it would be better to let another family take care of him. A family that actually knew what they were doing. The next morning, Alejandro called his lawyer, Carlos, to discuss the situation. After briefly explaining the context, the lawyer informed Alejandro of something he hadn't expected. There is another family interested in adopting Matias, They have been married for years, have solid financial resources, and have already gone through all the necessary legal processes. It would be a quick and safe transition for the boy. Alejandro felt a lump in his throat at that. Part of him wanted to agree immediately. Letting Matias go would be easier, less complicated. He wouldn't have to deal with the emotional burden, the memories of Camila, or the fact that he had failed both as a husband and as a man. "I understand," Alejandro said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Let's get on with it then." But as soon as he hung up the phone, he realized that something inside him was bothering him. The image of Matias, with his wide, confused eyes, appeared in his mind. The way the boy held Camila's photo, the way he pronounced her name, all of this seemed to scream that he belonged to that story, to that incomplete family. For the rest of the day, Alejandro tried to convince himself that he was making the right decision. He kept telling himself that it was better this way, that Matias deserved a perfect family, something that he, Alejandro, could never offer. But no matter how much he tried to rationalize, a feeling of discomfort persisted. Later, as he watched Matias playing in the garden, Alejandro noticed that the boy seemed different. There was a shadow of sadness in his movements, as if he already knew what was coming. Alejandro felt a tightness in his chest. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. "Matia," he finally called, slowly approaching. The boy looked at him with an expression that was a mix of curiosity and fear. "Yes?" Alejandro hesitated, searching for the right words. "I talked to a few people about what to do. It seems like there's another family interested in adopting you. They can give you a good life, much better than I could." Matias was silent for a moment, as if he was processing this. Then, in a voice that seemed to carry the weight of years of loneliness, he asked, "Why don't you want me?" The question hit Alejandro like a punch in the stomach. He hadn't expected it. He wanted to answer that it wasn't a question of wanting or not wanting, but the words escaped coldly and distantly. "You're not my son, Matias. I can't just pretend that you are." The boy lowered his head, but he didn't cry. He just nodded slowly, as if he had already accepted his fate. "I understand," he said, his voice barely audible. The scene broke Alejandro's heart. He knew he had made the right decision, but why did he feel so wrong? Why did that conversation leave a bitter taste in his mouth? He tried to convince himself that he was doing the best for Matias, but the weight of guilt and doubt remained, hanging over him like a constant shadow. The day was cloudy, as if the sky reflected the emotional storm that Alejandro carried inside him. Matias had spent the last few hours in silence, avoiding looking directly at Alejandro. He seemed smaller, more fragile, as if the weight of rejection was crushing his childish soul. The Mendonzas would arrive the next day to talk to Matias and begin the preparations for the adoption. Alejandro knew it was the best thing to do. At least that's what he kept telling himself. Still, something inside him screamed that this was wrong. Every time he saw Matias, he felt a tightness in his chest that he couldn't ignore. That afternoon, as he walked through the wide hallways of the mansion, Alejandro realized that Matias was no longer inside the house. Worried, he went out, into the garden, and found him sitting under a huge tree, leaning against the trunk. The boy held Camila's photograph against his chest, as if it were his only consolation. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, but there were no tears in them. Just a resigned expression, as if he had already accepted that the world would never truly want him. Alejandro hesitated for a moment before approaching. He knew he should say something, but the words seemed stuck in his throat. Finally, he crouched, down next to Matias, trying to meet the boy's gaze. "Matias," Alejandro began, his voice hoarse and hesitant. I wanted to talk to you." The boy didn't answer right away. He kept staring straight ahead as if lost in thought. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, barely audible. "It's okay. I understand." "Understand what?" Alejandro asked, even though he already knew the answer. "That you don't want me," Matias said without looking away. "You said it, you were clear. Those simple words, spoken with such calm and maturity for a child of only 6, cut Alejandro like a sharp knife. He felt the weight of the cruelty of his own words coming back to haunt him. How could he have been so cold? How could he hurt that innocent boy who only wanted to be loved? Matias, I didn't mean it the way it sounded, Alejandro tried, desperately searching for a way to fix the damage. I thought it would be better for you to go with another family. A family that can give you everything you deserve. Matias finally turned to face him, his eyes wide and full of pain. But I already have a family. My mommy said I would have one. She promised. Alejandro felt the air being sucked from his lungs. Those words were like a direct echo of Camilla's letters, of the conversations she had probably had with Matias over all those months. He realized in that moment that it wasn't just about him or his limitations. It was about Camilla's legacy. It was about the love she had dreamed of building. I know she promised, Alejandro said, his voice breaking. And I was selfish. I ignored what she wanted because I was scared. I was scared that I wasn't good enough, that I didn't know how to take care of you. But now I see that I was wrong. Matias tilted his head, as if he was evaluating whether he could trust Alejandro's words. Are you scared? The question caught Alejandro off guard. He hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. Yes, I am. I've never been a father. I don't know how to do this right, but... He paused, taking a deep breath. I also know that I can't let you go. Not after everything Camilla has done for you. Not after everything she dreamed for us. Matias was silent for a few seconds, as if he was processing this. Then, finally, he asked, Are you going to try? Alejandro felt a lump in his throat. He looked at the boy in front of him, a boy who had suffered so much, who had been rejected so many times, but who still held a spark of hope within him. He knew it wouldn't be easy. He knew there would be hard days ahead, but he also knew he couldn't give up. Yes, Matias, Alejandro replied, his voice firm despite the tears streaming down his face. I'll try, and I'll do my best to be the father you deserve. Matias looked at him for a moment longer, as if deciding if that was true. Then, slowly, he nodded. Okay. Alejandro felt a deep relief, as if a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He reached out, to the boy hesitantly but sincerely. Matias hesitated for a moment but then took it, placing his small, trusting hand in Alejandro's. I'm sorry I hurt you, Alejandro said, pulling the boy into a careful embrace. I won't let you go. I promise. Matias didn't respond, but his body relaxed in Alejandro's embrace, as if finding a safe haven after years of being adrift. In that moment, Alejandro knew he had made the right decision. He couldn't bring Camila back, but he could honor her love by creating a home for Matias, a home where love, not emptiness, reigned. As they stood there under the shade of the tree, Alejandro realized that this was the beginning of something new. A new beginning, a way to fill the space left by Camila with something she had always wanted. A family. That night, while Matias slept soundly in his room at the mansion, Alejandro decided to review the documents Camila had left behind once more. Among the letters and adoption forms, he found something he hadn't noticed before. A small flash drive with the name Alejandro handwritten on it. His heart raced as he realized that this could be something important, something Camila wanted him to see. He turned on the television in the living room and plugged in the flash drive. After a few seconds, the screen came to life with the image of Camila sitting in front of the camera. She looked beautiful, as always, but there was a seriousness in her eyes that Alejandro knew well. It was the look in her eyes when she was talking about something that really mattered. Alejandro, she began, her voice soft and caring, but also firm. If you're seeing this, it's because something happened to me before I could finish what I started with Matias. I hope you've met this special boy. He's incredible, Alejandro. It's like he has a piece of my heart inside him. Camila paused as if she were carefully choosing her next words. Then she continued. I know that maybe you're confused or even scared. You've always been like this. so strong on the outside but so insecure on the inside. But I want you to know that love doesn't need blood ties. It doesn't have to be perfect to be true. All you have to do is open your heart to Matthias. He'll teach you as much as you'll teach him." She smiled, that smile that always managed to calm Alejandro in the most difficult moments. "Don't let fear stop you from loving again. I know that you can be the father he needs, and I know that together you can build something beautiful. Please take care of him for me. And who knows, maybe he can help you find peace too." The recording ended abruptly, leaving only a black screen. Alejandro remained still, his hands shaking as he held the remote control. Camilla's words echoed in his mind, repeating themselves like a mantra. Love doesn't need blood ties. That simple sentence contained everything he needed to understand. It wasn't about biology or social conventions. It was about connection, about creating something meaningful together. And now, he knew exactly what he needed to do. The next day, Alejandro called his lawyer. "Carlos," he said, his voice firm and resolute, "I want to start the process of adopting Matthias, officially." On the other end of the line, Carlos sounded surprised. "Are you sure? The Mendonzas are ready to move forward. It would be a quick transition." "I'm sure," Alejandro interrupted without hesitation. "Matthias is part of my family, now. He always has been from the moment Camilla chose him. I'm not letting him go." After hanging up the phone, Alejandro felt a huge weight lifted from his shoulders. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but he also knew he was making the right decision for Camilla, for Matthias, and ultimately for himself. In the days that followed, the routine at the mansion slowly began to change. Alejandro realized he needed to make this place more welcoming, more like a home. He hired a kind and experienced housekeeper to help with Matthias, someone who could give the boy the affection and attention he deserved. Together they began to transform the cold and impersonal space into something warmer, with colorful paintings on the walls, soft pillows on the sofas, and even a small vegetable garden in the garden where Matthias loved to play. Matthias, in turn, began to feel more secure. He smiled more, explored the house with curiosity, and even tried to help Alejandro with certain tasks, such as organizing papers or setting the table for breakfast. However, there were still times when Alejandro noticed shadows of insecurity in the boy's behavior. Sometimes Matthias would ask for reassurance that he would not be abandoned again. "Are you going to stay here forever?" the boy asked one night as they watched a movie together. Alejandro looked at him, feeling a tightness in his chest. He knew those words came from years of abandonment and uncertainty. "Yes, Matthias," he replied, placing a comforting hand on the boy's shoulder. "I promised I wouldn't let you go, and I never break my promises." Matthias nodded, but Alejandro realized there was still a long way to go. He knew he needed to prove, with daily actions, that he was here to stay. That the love Camilla had dreamed of for them could finally become reality. And so, little by little, the cold mansion began to transform into a real home. Matthias's laughter echoed through the hallways, and Alejandro discovered something he had long forgotten: the sound of love filling the empty space. Weeks had passed since Alejandro had decided to officially adopt Matthias. The routine between them had transformed into something neither of them had ever imagined: a genuine connection, built little by little, day by day. Alejandro learned to listen more, to observe Matthias's small gestures, and to respond with patience and affection. Matthias, in turn, began to trust more and more the man he now called father. One rainy afternoon, as the sound of raindrops hitting the windows filled the house, Alejandro and Matthias sat in the living room. The boy was drawing in a notebook, focused, while Alejandro leafed through some documents on the coffee table. Ever since he had started the adoption process, he had been trying to better understand what Camilla had planned, not only to honor her but also to make sure he was doing everything right by Matthias. Suddenly, Matthias put down his pencil and looked at Alejandro with a thoughtful expression. "Did you know I dreamed about this?" the boy asked, pointing to himself and then to Alejandro. "About what?" Alejandro answered, surprised by the unexpected question. About you, Matias said, looking down shyly. Before I met you, Mom always talked about you. She said you were important. I wanted to meet you, but I was also afraid. Alejandro felt a tightness in his chest. He knew Matias still carried deep emotional scars, marks left by years of abandonment and loneliness. But seeing this boy, so young and already so resilient, open his heart like that touched something deep inside him. I was afraid too, Alejandro admitted, his voice soft and sincere. Afraid of not being good enough for you, afraid of making mistakes. But I realized that love isn't about being perfect. It's about trying every day to be better. And I want to be better for you, Matias. The boy's eyes glistened with tears that he tried to hold back. He swallowed hard before asking hesitantly, Do you think she's happy? My mommy? Alejandro took a deep breath, searching for the right words. He knew that this was important to Matias. Perhaps the most important thing. I'm sure she does, he replied, his voice choked with emotion. She loved you more than anything in the world. And you know what? She loved me too. She brought us here because she knew we needed each other. Matias lowered his head, but tears began to stream down his cheeks. He tried to hide it, quickly wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, but Alejandro noticed. He approached slowly, pulling the boy into his arms as he would a small child. It's okay, Alejandro murmured, stroking Matias's hair. You can cry. It's okay. And then finally, Matias let out all the pain, all the fear, and all the loneliness that he had kept inside for so long. He sobbed, clutching Alejandro's shirt as if he feared losing him again. It was a deep, cathartic cry that seemed to wash away all the pain that had accumulated over the years. I love you, Dad, Matias whispered between sobs, his words barely audible but full of meaning. Those 3 words hit Alejandro like a bolt of lightning. He felt a lump in his throat, and his own tears began to roll freely down his face. For a moment he just held the boy tightly, saying nothing, allowing them both to share that moment of pure connection. I love you too, son, Alejandro finally replied, his voice hoarse with emotion. More than you know. In that instant, something inside Alejandro changed completely. He understood clearly and definitively the legacy of love that Camila had left for him. It wasn't just about Matias or filling the void she would leave behind. It was about learning to love again, to open his heart to another person even when it seemed scary. It was about building something bigger than himself, a family. When Matias's crying finally subsided, he looked up to look at Alejandro. Do you promise you'll never leave me? I promise, Alejandro replied, holding the boy's face in his hands. You're my son now. Forever. Matias smiled, a genuine, radiant smile, unlike anything Alejandro had ever seen before. In that moment, he knew he had found his purpose. The huge, cold house that had once been a symbol of success was now a home, a place where love, not emptiness, reigned. They stood there for a long time holding each other as the rain continued to fall outside. But inside that room there was warmth, peace, and the knowledge that finally they were exactly where they were meant to be, together. The story of Alejandro and Matias is a powerful reminder that true love knows no bounds, not of time, not of blood, not of circumstance. Camila left a legacy of compassion and hope that united 2 lost souls, transforming pain into healing and loneliness into family. Sometimes life presents us with challenges that seem insurmountable, but it is precisely these tests that show us what we are capable of when we choose to love. Alejandro learned that being a father is not about biological ties, but about being present, listening, caring, and giving of yourself. And Matias, even at such a young age, showed that the human heart has an incredible capacity to forgive, trust again, and love without reservations. Together they proved that it is never too late to build something beautiful and meaningful. Because, in the end, as Camila always knew, love does not need blood ties. It only needs courage to happen. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone special. Many times we need to remember the power of unconditional love and the importance of being present in the lives of those we love. Leave your message in the comments. What does love mean to you? Subscribe to the channel for more moving stories that will inspire you and make you reflect on the connections that really matter. Until next time.